Well, now we are going to celebrate Juneteenth, a holiday put in place as a federal holiday by President Biden. And this holiday celebrates the end of slavery as it was reported in Texas. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, but it wasn't until 1865 that the news of freedom, that the slaves had been emancipated by the Emancipation Proclamation, reached those people who were living in Texas as slaves. So that was great news. And of course, when you've been a slave for generations, freedom is a mystery. What is freedom? These people who were slaves lived on large plantations for generations. Most of them have never wandered off the plantation because that was illegal. You could be killed for that if you didn't have a note in your hand from your owner. So most of them did not know where to go, what to do, and for generations they had depended on the slave owner to provide them housing, as bad as it was, food, as bad as it was, and then work. Of course, the work wasn't profiting them, but they were able to live, because if they didn't work as slaves, they would be killed or tortured. So that's all they knew. So what was freedom? They didn't know. And of course, they couldn't read because that was prohibited. If you learned to read, you could be killed, and the person who taught you how to read could be punished or killed, depending on who it was. Now, many people found it necessary or desirable to have a slave learn to read because slave children were often playing with white slave owners' children. And so it was helpful in the education of the white child to have a playmate who was a little bit literate. And then they could also do extra work around the house. So slowly, very few, but some blacks did learn to read some words. But in order to really appreciate your choices after slavery, you had to be able to read. And of course, that problem is still being faced today. Many people who were slaves still have problems with their education, and we are still bolstering that today through educational programs, encouraging education. But education is something that is generational, and most people who value in education had parents who valued in education, had grandparents who valued in education, and could see an increase in prosperity, a betterment of life through education. Well, this wasn't true with the slaves. They had no relationship to education, and so education often did not bring them the promises that whites had with education. So education was not easy to come by, and who was going to educate these slaves and former slaves? The white teachers would not do it because they hated the slaves, and the blacks who were minimally educated would do it, but there were so few of them that they really could not provide an adequate education. Well, as some blacks after slavery did go on and become literate, and some of those also went on to help teach others to read, you can see that the black schools were going to be terribly inadequate in order to really educate the population of freed slaves. And that went on for decades. That separate and unequal education was in the United States. And it wasn't until the 1960s that we really started to see advancements in equal education, opportunities for people of all races to go to the various schools, the white schools, which were more skilled in education, which had books from many different countries, which could provide all kinds of education to anyone who was enrolled. So the evils of slavery lasted for over 100 years. And Juneteenth is the day we are celebrating that the people in Texas learned that they were free and were able to go out, scratch their way through the world, and try to find an education. Now, we all know slavery did not end in 1865. There were always black slaves, and there still are, and there were always white slaves, and there still are. But it meant that people were now being dealt with as humans and not property, and that crimes against people over the next 100 years were slowly going to be held as true crimes, and people were slowly going to realize they had rights that were inalienable just because they were people. So on Juneteenth, we celebrate this day to say we are better, we are all better, we are not treating people in unequal ways. We realize that all people are equal and that all people should have equal opportunities available. Not that all people are going to go to Harvard, but it does mean that all people should have access to books through libraries, access to educated teachers through our schools, and now through the internet and other places, and that people will have better chances to advance themselves to their full potential and to reach their aspirations, their long-term goals, and to be able to see the value in their own lives. So I hope you go out and enjoy this Juneteenth and look around. Where do you see people who are enslaved? Maybe you are going to consider the plight of people who are involved in enslavement by pedophiles, or people who are enslaved by the various sex trades, or people who are enslaved by drugs and don't have control over their lives because they have been caught up by drug dealers or otherwise in the drug trade and now can't move forward because they are stuck. Perhaps you're going to work for people who have suffered domestic violence. And I don't mean the kind that Amber Heard talked about. I mean domestic violence such that they feel threatened if they leave the house, or their children are being threatened with being killed by an irate parent, or families which are subjected to beatings or other tortures from which they can't escape. Look around your community. How can you make sure things are better in your community? Where are your libraries? Are they adequately staffed? Are they clean? Are they up to date? Where's your law library? What are its hours? Is it accessible? These are the kinds of things you can look at in your community to see whether or not your community is encouraging people to make life choices that improve their own lives and can improve the lives of others in need. Another thing is, what are your transportation services? Services are needed if you have a great library, if you have a great law library, but it's difficult to get to because people don't have a car, or people can't afford gas, or their car is not in good repair and they can't use it, or they can't afford to get the license for their car, or other things like a smog check or whatever might be needed. They might need public transportation. What kind of public transportation do you have in your community, and how can you improve it? These are the kinds of things that keep us moving, and moving in a great direction for the future. Look around your community and find out what kinds of things can you do to make sure that people who are having problems, who may be enslaved, can reach out for help. Look at your 911 emergency call system. Look at your mental health programs in your local community. Look at your foster care system. How are the children in that system being treated? Look at your crime rates. How many people are being incarcerated? Does it seem that the law is incarcerating only certain races of people, and others who are doing equally bad crimes seem to be walking free on the streets? These are things that need to be investigated. How are criminals being treated while they are in jail? Because these people will eventually be released back onto your streets. Are they being given the services that they need in order that they will be better citizens once they get out of jail? Then look at your educational system. Are the students being given a good education? Are people in charge of the schools too blinded by old school techniques that they really can't give students what they need for the future? Are they still teaching them the same things you learned in school back in the 1960s? If so, that school system needs to be totally revitalized. New people need to come in with new and better ideas and more expansive views. Are the people in your community adequately represented on the school board, in teaching jobs, in school administrative jobs? Look around. Are things moving in the right direction in your community? How are you treating the homeless in your community? Homeless people have a big effect on how the lives of everybody will be. Homeless people can bring in diseases if they don't have places to wash. They can bring in violence if they don't have ways to report people who are in need of mental health care or people who are violent within the homeless community. They can also just be a problem on the community if they don't have enough to eat and they don't have other resources that they need. Look at your own mental health community and see how you can help make things better. There's so many ways that you can help on Juneteenth. It's not just about past slavery. It's also about the future of the country, with everybody being able to participate and encouraging people who have special strengths, special ideas, special abilities to be able to use those ideas and participate in a productive manner so that everybody in the community can benefit and the community can progress forward. There's so much more to say about Juneteenth, but I'm going to end it here. Say happy Juneteenth, and I hope you, if you decide to have a family gathering, that would be great. If you decided just doing community work, that would be great. It is a federal holiday, so you do get Juneteenth off, and I hope you will use it in some way that will benefit you and others. Bye. Please like and subscribe.